and it went viral. And with that just came so much abuse. It was unlike anything I've experienced up until this point.
My guest today is Debbie, an Israeli-Costa Rican jeweler who works out of under the moniker Roots Metals. Debbie is also an artist, writer, and educator. And in addition to creating and selling her jewelry, which often draws upon images and themes found within Judaism, she uses her considerable online platform to educate her followers on anti-Semitism and Jewish history. Debbie, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. So first off, I think you are the first jeweler that we have had on the podcast. So you are making podcasts against some history. So that's very exciting. I want to know, how did you get into making jewelry? What does the process look like?
Yeah, so it was really random. I was working as a copywriter after college, and I was really bored, and I decided I needed to pick up a hobby and do something for fun. So I took some classes, and I really liked it. And the rest is history. When I went to grad school, I just kind of like did it for fun. And then I didn't go to grad school for jewelry, but um but yeah, I did it for fun. And then after grad school, I was going through some things, so I was like, I need to put like all my writing aside for a minute and just start a small little business. And then it grew, and then yeah, then I started kind of like merging my writing and like my Jewish history with the jewelry, but I didn't intend to do that. It sort of just happened. Yeah, so as far as the process, which I forgot to answer, um, basically, so I work in two different methods. I either like work from like actual scraps of metal where like I saw it and I solder it and all of that, or I cast, like I carve like different things out of wax and then cast it into silver or gold. Which actually the first casting that we know of in history started in Israel like a very long time ago. So that's kind
Is
of a
that
cool
right?
fact. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. I believe it was before we were Israelites. I feel like it was during the period of the Canaanites, but it still started there. So
Yeah, nevertheless, still
yeah.
very, very cool and impressive.
Yeah.
What's the hardest part about making jewelry? Because that process you just described, to me, a layman, it sounds all very hard. So please enlighten me.
Uh the hardest part about making jewelry. I mean, I don't know, because I just experiment, and if something doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I wouldn't say that there's like something that's like the hardest. I mean, there's a lot of things that are hard in like the business sense, but as far as making things, I guess the hardest part actually is that metal is really expensive. So like if I mess up, that sucks. But you can also recycle it, so it's not the end of the world.
Well, I read that you, if when you can, basically all of your products are made using recycled metal. Is that right?
Hmm. Yep.
Is that
Yeah.
is that a conscious choice?
Yeah, for sure. You know, anything I can do to help the environment. I grew up in a family where my dad works in like renewable energy, so it's like a big thing.
Mm. I took a look at some of your pieces, and you often draw upon Jewish imagery in your
Mhm.
designs. And you've actually said that, I'll quote you, "Hamzas and evil eyes are just a normal part of my childhood, and that's what I find comforting." Did you know that from the start you wanted to incorporate Jewish themes in your jewelry, or was it something that you sort of discovered as you went along?
So I actually, when I started Roots, which was when I after grad school, so I'd been making jewelry for a while before that, but when I started Roots as like my company, I it was actually after I went on a trip to India with my sister, and being in India, I kind of like I started observing all these like different cultures in India, and I was like, I've never looked at my own culture through the eyes that I'm having right now. And I started doing that. And it's what inspired me to like start making jewelry based off of like Jewish motifs. And yeah, so like me and my sister were discussing this in India, and she's actually the one that came up with the name Roots because like my roots. Um so yeah, it was as far as like Roots, the company, yeah, it was definitely a conscious choice. But like before that I had just been making like random things.
Yeah. Wow. What was your trip to India like?
It was awesome. It was really, really cool. Yeah, we were like going all through like North India, and we actually ended in Mumbai, and we visited the Jewish community there, which um was really cool. And they like actually, we spent some time with them. They told us about some of like their legends that they have as a community, and one of them actually ended up in my book, so it all came like full circle.
That's awesome. And we are going to get onto your book later because there's a very interesting theme about it. Before we do that, I want to ask your heritage is you're Israeli-Costa Rican,
Yeah.
which is very interesting because it's influenced your book, it's influenced your jewelry.
Yeah.
Um, how have you used your heritage and where you come from in your work?
Um, as far as, like jewelry, obviously being inspired by all the different motifs, initially when I started Roots, all my collections weren't necessarily based off of Jewish things, but lately I've been doing that more and more. Um, like my next one is based off of the practice of Jewish astrology, which not a lot of people know about. Um, but yeah, definitely in my writing, it's influenced me a lot. My book, a lot of it was influenced by kind of like my different like eclectic background. Um yeah, I mean it's, all the different things I grew up with have like really influenced who I am. They've also like influenced my view on anti-Semitism because I feel like um American Jews in general have a very narrow perspective of anti-Semitism because they've experienced what they've experienced, but they don't always understand that it's like different in different parts of the world. Um, Up until recently, the American Jewish community I mean, there was obviously always anti-Semitism, but it wasn't as bad as it is now. And so, um, yeah, I don't know. It's shaped all of that. So, like my writing, my jewelry, how I view anti-Semitism and understand it.
Well, that's interesting. In addition to being the first jeweler, I believe you're also the first Costa Rican on the podcast. So making
There's
history twice.
there's not very many of us in general. I think there's like I could be totally wrong and this would be really embarrassing. But I think there's like 3 million people in Costa Rica, and if I'm wrong, I'm so sorry. Um and there's 3,000 Jews. So it's like nothing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask, what is the perception of Jews like in Costa Rica, and to what extent is anti-Semitism an issue there?
So I do want to like make it clear that I have not lived there in 13 years. So obviously as things have changed with social media, I feel like a lot of ideas that weren't necessarily in the mainstream in Costa Rica back then have become more common.
Sure.
Uh, but again, I don't live there anymore, so I can't really speak to that right now. But growing up, uh, most of the anti-Semitism was very like old school, like Catholic anti-Semitism. Costa Rica is a very Catholic country, so um, just stuff about killing Jesus and that type of stuff. Costa Rica is actually one of the safest countries for Jews in Latin America, but we were very much still like influenced by what was going around us. So like the bombings in Argentina in the 90s like really shaped the community. The Venezuela, like in the early 2000s, everything that was going on, a lot of Venezuelan Jews actually came to Costa Rica. So there's a lot of contact between different Latin American Jewish communities. So even if like something wasn't necessarily happening in Costa Rica, we felt it. Um, there's a lot of like, like when kids are growing up, they go to like um, camps with kids from other places in Latin America, Jewish kids. So yeah, everything that's going on elsewhere, we feel. But yeah, when I was growing up, it was mostly like Jesus stuff.
Yeah.
Now, in my observation, it's become a lot more about Israel. And I think the internet is a big part of that. Costa Rica's always had good relations with Israel, but yeah, I'm seeing that a little bit more and more. A lot of my family still lives there, so I see it through them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as mentioned, you are now in the States. You are now based, and what do you make of anti-Semitism and the perception of Jews in America?
Oh yeah.
How long have we got?
Yeah. I mean, I've been in the U.S. for, like I said, 13-ish years, and I gotta say, it's gotten exponentially worse. Really, very quickly. Um, I I think social media is very much to blame for that. And I definitely see like a marrying of like right wing anti Semitism with left wing anti Semitism. They're all pushing the same tropes. Uh, and so I see that spreading very quickly. I feel very, I guess, isolated in the sense that I don't feel like we have a safe place to turn. It seems to be coming from all directions. I I've always felt uh, that we need like extra security as far as like synagogues or like Jewish communal institutions. I felt that my entire life just because I grew up in Latin America where like the Argentina bombings took place, and so our community in Costa Rica was always very well guarded. Um, like there's three synagogues in Costa Rica, but the main one is like in a fortress. Like it's there's a lot of security.
Right.
And so I've always just carried that with me. So it's not exactly like jarring to see American synagogues just kind of like start doing that. I actually am concerned that it took them this long, to be honest. But I do feel more and more actually nervous when I hang out in Jewish places. I would not feel comfortable at this point going into a synagogue where there's no security. And I don't think I ever really felt that here before, when I first got here, at least.
Mm. I completely understand why you feel that, and it's really sad that you do feel that, and it's not just you; it's other people in America. And
Yeah.
I'm in Britain, and from my perspective, we don't have the level the level of deadly violence, the shootings, the hostage attacks in the same way. And it's I'm not even in the country, and I'm scared.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never before, I mean, I've definitely encountered anti Semitism here since I moved here, but not to this degree and not to like where the point where I'm like, I actually feel in my day to day, I feel scared.
Right. Yeah, I see that, and this is something that we're hearing more and more of. Now, you talk about this a lot online as well. You have become a leading voice in the anti-Semitism activist community, if we want to call it that, which I just did. And your Instagram page, Roots Metals, is a great educational resource on the topic of anti-Semitism. How and why did you begin dedicating your Instagram page to this?
Yeah, everyone always asks me this question, and I know something happened. I can't remember what it was. For the life of me, I can't remember. But some sort of anti-Semitic incident happened in 2020, I believe. And I was like, I've had enough. I need to say something. And I said something, and it went pretty viral. And people kept asking me for more and more. And so I started making actual posts, and it just went from there. It just kind of like evolved from there, and here we are now. It's kind of came full circle, because I mean, I started this just trying to like explore my roots, and now I'm exploring in a different sense. I'm looking at history as well as just making, art.
Mm. How do you decide what to post on? Because going through your page, you post on everything to do with anti-Semitism and,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing, and it's great. So how do you choose what topic?
So unfortunately, there's always something going on.
True.
So um, I am very much inspired to write things on whatever issue is happening. A lot of the times I just, I spend a lot of time reading, if you can't tell. And a lot of times something just like strikes me as interesting. And so I'm like, I'm going to make a post about that. So yeah, it's like current events, but not current events isn't like this is happening right now, but what is like the historical context for all of this is kind of like my main approach. But yeah, that whatever interests me in any given moment. Sometimes people give me suggestions, and I'll take those. And honestly, if I run out of ideas, all I have to do is go on anti-Zionist Twitter. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I need to dispel this and this and this. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, your Instagram posts are so well researched, and when I found out that you were a tour guide at a Jewish museum in Costa Rica, I was not surprised. I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, of course she was.
Yeah.
Many guests on the podcast have said that it's crucial to be well educated, and it's so clear that you are. How have you taught yourself about anti-Semitism and Jewish history? Was there a process? You're like, right, I'm going to dedicate this time to this, or was it just something you accumulated throughout your life?
Yeah. So I actually do have like an academic background in it, not like I didn't major in Jewish history, but I did do a minor in like world religions. And then when I was in grad school, I my thesis I did research and for the period between 1945 and 1948 in Jewish history, and obviously guiding at the museum. Honestly, I was a guide, but I basically did everything. No offense to everyone else. Um, it's a very small museum. But yeah, I
Hopefully
did
they don't listen to
everything.
this.
I don't think they speak English, so I think we're safe. Um, but yeah, so the museum. But ever since I was a kid, I just loved reading about Jewish history, and even though I have like like a professional and academic background in it, I most of the stuff I've learned through my own research. I read so much. I'm constantly reading about Jewish history. It's just like one of my favorite things in the world, even though a lot of it is really dark, but it's just really interesting to me. So I don't know. I just read and read and read and read, and I learn random things, and then I want to make a post on it. So yeah.
Are you just sort of going down internet rabbit holes, or do you have favorite authors that you like, that sort of thing?
It's mostly internet rabbit holes.
Nice.
I've always, well, for a long time, I guess, I've been very interested in Jewish history from a secular perspective, as in like secular history, not like biblical accounts. And I've been really interested in how you can merge those, I guess, if that makes sense, how they connect. And um, so I fall down those rabbit holes so much. And I usually, if there's like some sort of people that wrote specifically on whatever I'm reading, I'll buy their books. But it's not like I specifically go to like this author or that author. I look everywhere. I also think it's really important to do that. I think it's important to not stick to like one person, because everyone has bias, is what I always say. So
Right. Right. And often it can be really beneficial to read people you kind of disagree with.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I do that on purpose. Like I will read with from people that I disagree with, because I want to know what they're saying and I want to know how to respond to that. And I feel like a lot of times we kind of shy away from that, or we ignore what they're saying because we just don't want to like look at it. But I want to understand where they're coming from, and I want to see what I believe once I've read what they're saying, if that makes sense.
Totally. You got to test your beliefs. That's how you know if you believe them. And you don't want to
Yeah.
stay in your bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, you're an academic, you're a historian, so you will know that anti-Semitism evolves and adapts with the times. In your opinion, what do you think is currently the most pernicious manifestation of anti-Semitism affecting Jews today?
Oh man. um that's really hard to answer. I think that it depends on which country. Okay, in the States, I my main thing is I feel like on college campuses, I believe that a lot of young Jewish kids are being groomed by certain groups. And I feel like that's dangerous. I feel that they have kind of a very surface level understanding of Jewish history and Jewish identity, and they go to college and they have the best intentions in the world, and I feel like they're being groomed by groups that have a little bit more of a sinister purpose than we might like to think. Uh,
So, without
yeah.
naming the groups, what are some of the ideas and the ideologies that they are professing to these kids?
I think that they are coming to them with like anti-Zionism, cannot be anti-Semitism. We're just criticizing Israel. We're blah 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 blah. But at the same time, they're perpetuating these really dangerous conspiracies and really dangerous people, even if they're on the other side of the political aisle, are latching on to them. Um, I feel like we see this with the BDS map. I'm sure you've heard of it, but basically in the Boston area, BDS made like this very intricate map of like Jewish institutions and uh, Jewish people, who they blamed not just for Zionism, but for like a bunch of other things. And very quickly, a neo Nazi website picked it up. So to me, I feel like they're normalizing these anti Semitic conspiracies and tropes in the name of social justice, and dangerous people can pick up on that. And that's really what worries me, I think, the most in the US.
So, to an extent, we see that here in universities on campuses as well.
Yeah.
And I also have noticed a normalization of rhetoric which breaches the IRA definition, the international definition of anti-Semitism. I've got two examples off my head. It says to say Zionism is racism, that breaches the definition. You are denying Jewish people self-determination, and also to compare Israel or Israelis to Nazis. We are seeing that. We have seen protests get way out of hand and have used anti-Semitic tropes. And again, I've seen that on US campuses as well. And you're right, it is quite worrying to see young, impressionable minds think, oh, this is what activism is. This is right.
Yeah, and I just, if you know anything about Jewish history, it's not looking good. It just normalizes these things, and it doesn't matter if you're saying it's just Zionists. It doesn't matter because you're still spreading the same conspiracies that get Jews hurt.
Right, right. Now, also in America, we have seen, following the anti-Semitic statements made by Kanye and the movie that Kyrie Irving shared, we have seen an influx in anti-Semitism from the strain of Black Hebrew Israelites, which I think a lot of people find kind of confusing, because I think if you're not familiar with Jewish people or anti-Semitism that well,
Yeah.
you might think, oh, no, it's white supremacists that hate Jewish people. And then this other thing comes in. What has that been like from your perspective to watch, to see?
I mean, it just, as anti Semitism becomes normalized from every direction, you're seeing Jews become more and more isolated. And I think that's what we're feeling right now. Like we're getting hit from this direction and that direction and this other direction. And our voices, we're so small. Like there's so few of us, and we're just being spoken over. Like no one even knows we're out here talking. And so, yeah, I mean, just seeing, I mean, the BHI, like I've known about them since forever. I've encountered them for a very long time, but they were always very fringe. Like it was like, okay, these people are out of their minds, but but it doesn't really affect me. Like there's always going to be people saying anti-Semitic things. There always have been, but these again, this normalization is what's really concerning.
Yeah, most definitely. And people, if people don't know, I hope they will learn, or they do know, that anti-Semitism can come from many different places. It's not just one place. Now, another interesting thing is that Jews are sometimes incorrectly portrayed exclusively as white, and as we know, while some Jews may pass as white, even leaving aside that many Ashkenazi Jews do not accept the notion that they are white, there are also many Jewish communities around the world who simply cannot be put into this box at all, and therefore defy many anti-Semitic presumptions about Jews. Now, you are a Latina Jew. Do you ever find yourself having to explain your identity to people who may not even understand that Latina Jews exist?
Yeah, a lot of people think I either am mixed in the sense that one of my parents is Jewish and the other is not. Both my parents are Jewish, or that I converted, which again I did not. So there's definitely that ignorance. I mean, there's so much ignorance around Jewish identity to begin with. But yeah, people for sure have been confused. I think it was last year, I got contacted by someone from MTV for this documentary they were doing. And in the end, I chose to not do it for reasons. But yeah, she was insisting that I must either have converted or have a non-Jewish parent.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I know who my parents are.
Yeah,
I think.
that's astounding. Just this. No, you
Yeah.
must have converted or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And it was a non-Jewish person
of course.
who
Yeah,
was saying this. Yeah.
yeah. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Um,
Honestly, that whole conversation was very odd.
yeah, it sounds it.
So,
what are some of the experiences that you think might be unique to Latin Jews that you want both other Jews and non-Jews to know?
I think it's like on the one hand, it depends on the country, and on the other hand, we are all very connected, as I was explaining earlier. So what happens in Argentina, we feel. Um, but yeah, like each country has its own like different concerns. Like I know in Chile, for example, most of the anti-Semitism comes from the anti-Zionist ilk. In Costa Rica, at least when I was living there, it was very much the Jews killed Jesus ilk. Um, so it depends. As far as Latin Jews in the U.S., I feel like I can't really speak to that because I did not grow up here, and I did not grow up in like a Latin community in the United States, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I get that. I get that. Now, like many Jewish creatives with an online platform, you have unfortunately been the target of anti-Semitic attacks. Um,
Yeah.
what do you do when this happens, and do you have any advice for other Jewish people who might be facing the same thing?
Uh, yeah. I'm not sure how aware you've been of what's happened
I
recently.
did see that. Do you want to tell the listeners?
Yeah. So basically, someone made a tweet implying that I use a quote unquote Nazi font and I am sending secret white supremacist dog whistles through the word count of my posts. And it went viral. And with that just came so much abuse. It was unlike anything I've experienced up until this point. I actually had to contact the ADL.
Oh my
So
God.
it got really, really bad. It's still bad. It's hopefully it dies down soon, but oh my God, it's just been awful. So I would say if if you want to start doing this, I don't recommend putting your face out there, but that's too late for me. I definitely would feel safer if I was anonymous, and there's a lot of accounts that are anonymous. But I would definitely take precautions. I would not tell people where I live, and I, would keep my name out there, not out of there, not out there. Uh, and as far as like other things you can do, I definitely would exercise very strong boundaries. If someone is being anti Semitic, just block. Some people you can't reason with. Um, yeah, I mean, basic things. Don't say where you live. Don't put out all your information. But like, know that if you get started in Jewish activism, it is gonna happen. So
Mm.
yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. It's like it's something that I don't really know how to cope with. It's I feel like this is all very new to everyone. Social media is relatively new to the world, and anti-Semitism on social media is therefore relatively new to the world. So I don't really know. Um,
Well, you know what? Maybe it's a weird question. I'm essentially asking. You're a Jewish creator. How do you deal with the inevitable anti-Semitism that comes your way? And
yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry.
what I do, I mean, I do the best I can. I exercise the strongest possible boundaries I can. If things get really bad, I had to contact the ADL. I, as as a person who's also running a business, I don't ship things out of my house. I use a PO box. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I really thought that the thing that happened with your post, the allegation that you were using Nazi font and you intentionally chose to use 14 words because that's a white
my
supremacist thing,
God,
this really is a great example of how conspiracy theories that seemingly are laughable and just wild, and upon first viewing you might think, wow, that's a reach, how can they say that wacky thing? It
right.
actually it can lead to incessant harassment, as it has done, and a seemingly innocuous post can lead to targeted anti-Semitic bullying.
Yeah, I mean, you just said it. Like when I first saw it, I laughed
Mm.
because I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And then it went viral, and then it wasn't so funny
Right.
anymore.
Two retweets. You're
Yeah,
like, oh, that's pretty funny. And then
yeah. I was like, this is hilarious. And then an hour later, I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna get murdered.
I'm sorry. That sounds really scary. I'm sorry you're still going
Yeah,
through that, and I hope things get better soon.
yeah. Thank you.
Let's get on to I want to get on something a bit lighter, which is your debut book, which I thought was, the theme is very cool, and I'm going to say the title, and I apologize in advance if I mispronounce one of the words, so please do correct me. I'm going to have an attempt. Your book, The Witches of, is it? I want to say Escazú. No, I'm not even going to try. Please tell me that. Please.
Escazú.
Escazú. That was so far from what
Yeah.
I was going to say. The Witches of Escazú and Other Jewish Fairy Tales.
Yeah.
It takes a look at Jewish folklore. Can you tell us a bit about the book and why you wanted to write a book about Jewish folklore and fairy tales?
Yeah. So actually, that was never really something I thought about doing. But I was shooting a jewelry collection at my old house, and we had like a wishing well in the yard, and we were shooting by the wishing well, and someone that was involved in the shoot was started talking about fairy tales, and then I was like, oh, that's like an interesting idea for a jewelry collection, and then I was like, and I can make it a book as well. And there's various books on Jewish folklore, but it's mostly Yiddish folklore. So I wanted to do stuff that's more like inclusive to Jews around the world. So it's, like I said, I got something from India, and then the title story is a legend, I guess, from my hometown in Costa Rica, and then also I have a story that my grandpa used to tell me from when he survived the Holocaust. And yeah, just a little bit of each background. I feel like I said, most of these books are mostly focused on like Yiddish folklore, and I feel like we need to be more inclusive. So,
Most definitely, most definitely. Let me ask you, what's your favorite Jewish folktale?
uh, so let's see. I mean, I'm impartial to the witches. I grew up on it, so yeah, that's probably my favorite, which is why I made it the title story.
Without ruining the whole thing, because people should get the
Yeah.
book. Can you give us an abridged version? What's the title one about?
So it's essentially uh, a legend relating to the first Jewish people in Costa Rica, which were uh, the people fleeing the Spanish Inquisition. So people that practice Judaism in secret in Costa Rica.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. And it actually, like, to this day, my hometown is called the City of Witches in Costa Rica. No one knows why except the Jews, because no one else really knows about this story, but yeah.
Um, Debbie, I'm going to ask you something that I now ask all of our guests, which is if you are approached by someone who is not Jewish and say, I want to be an ally, I want to help in the fight against anti-Semitism, what should they do?
They should listen to the community consensus. There's always going to be fringe opinions. Uh, but we are a community. The Jewish people are a people, and as such, in general, the community is going to have certain opinions and concerns and feelings about what affects us. And what I see very often is people latching on to fringe ideas because those ideas they share.
Mm.
But being an ally is not about confirming your bias. Being an ally is about challenging your bias. And so that, I think that's the main thing I would say. Listen to Jews, but not just a random whoever. Listen to the community.
Great advice. Please tell the listeners, what have you got going on? What have you got coming up? And where can people find you?
So they can find me at Roots Metals on Instagram. I also have a website, rootsmetals.com, where I sell my stuff, but I also post my posts to it just because it's also easier to read that way. I have a podcast with my friend called Do You Wanna Talk Shit? I don't know if I'm allowed to say that here.
I'll bleep
but
it.
You can bleep it out.
Yeah.
I have the book, which you can buy on Amazon or order from your favorite bookseller. And what else do I have going on? Oh, I'm actually going to be in the UK for the Limud conference this December. So if your British listeners want to meet me, I'll be there.
Awesome. That is what date is that? Do you know?
I think it's the 23rd to the 28th.
All right.
I think. Don't like super quote me on it.
I won't super quote you, but that's good to know. All right. Debbie, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Against Antisemitism.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.